Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by. Today, my friends, we are once again looking at the Call of Duty Warzone meta. Of course, we've been talking about the meta a lot recently. However, at the same time, it's also been changing a lot recently. Raven has actually been pretty active on weapon tuning and weapon adjustments in Warzone since Season 3. Really, the Season 3 update sort of ignited all the rapid weapon tuning, and then since then, we got word that the Amax was probably going to be nerfed, and then they officially announced that the Amax, the Bullfrog, and the FARA were going to be adjusted. We can assume the Amax is going to be nerfed because they said before that the no king rules forever. The FARA, we can probably assume is going to be nerfed, and then the Bullfrog, we're not really sure. It could kind of go either way. Then alongside that, they also said that they're adjusting the ADS speed on a lot of the Cold War attachments that help out with that stat in specific. So today we're basically looking at the future of the Warzone meta, what's going to happen next, and what weapons are going to be competitive and what weapons are going to be viable once the next round of weapon tuning actually takes place. As always, if you enjoy the video, let me know by dropping a like on it. Let's go for 4,000 likes on this one. And of course, if you're new to the channel or if you haven't already subscribed, this is the place to be for everything going on in COD. So feel free to subscribe. That way you can always stay up to date. All right, so we're back on Tier Maker. As you guys know, I made this list back after the 1.33 update. I went ahead, I took screenshots of all the weapons, imported them in, and I made this list. And previously, we ranked every single weapon in the game. Since then, we've gone through and we've edited it some. Since the Season 3 update, we actually edited what weapons were the top meta, what weapons were competitive, viable, below average, niche, which it seems like a lot of people thought the niche category meant the weapon was bad. Like, for instance, the AS Val is in here. Keep in mind, the Val is a great weapon just in solos and duos because it doesn't really have much ammo. It's a beast of an AR. It's just not viable in every situation. That's why it's in the niche category. We've also got the garbage category as well. The weapons that we're not really looking at too much. But mainly what we're looking at here is viable and higher, because this is what's going to, I would say, shift a lot come the next round of weapon tuning, because of course, right away, we look at the top meta. The M16 sort of a toss-up. It could be top meta, it could be competitive. That doesn't really matter too much just because this meta currently is so open and it's about to become even better in my opinion. I think after this next round of weapon tuning, the meta will be at the best point that it's ever been at. Better than the Grau meta, the Bruin meta, the Kilo meta back in Season 6 where there were quite a few viable weapons. This next meta looks to be pretty solid and you'll see why as we go throughout the video. But starting first with the Amax. They say they're going to nerf this thing. If I had to guess, they might add like an additional damage drop off to it. They might increase the recoil a little bit. We're going to have to wait and see. The Amax does have some recoil already, but honestly, it's really not hard to control whatsoever. So this is definitely going to be brought down to tier. This is no longer going to be top meta. However, I'm hoping they just don't absolutely massacre it, right? That's something that they've done with quite a few Modern Warfare weapons in the past. I mean, we can look at this list of weapons that at one point were really good that now really aren't so good anymore. You think of things like the EBR, which at one point was pretty solid, very, very consistent. The R90, which was the shotgun, which was the secondary at one point. Now, you don't really see a ton of it in use. I believe the AUG was nerfed at one point. We had plenty of weapons that were really, really good that now are kind of just, in there, not super usable, but they're about to become a lot more viable and a lot more competitive because let's say the Amax at minimum drops down into the competitive category. They nerf the damage by a bit. They nerf the damage drop off or whatever it may be. I'm hoping they don't nerf it into the ground. I'd like to think they won't because it is going to add some diversity into the Cold War versus Modern Warfare meta. We obviously have a lot of Cold War weapons that they're focusing on right now, a lot of Cold War weapons that they're pushing. That's not so much the case with the Modern Warfare weapons. But anyways, we look at this all. We got the car still in top meta. They didn't say they were going to touch it, so I'm going to leave it there for the time being. What they did say that we're going to touch, though, is the FARA, which currently I'd have in competitive. It could almost be top meta just because it's grown in popularity a lot recently because we've sort of figured out, hey, this thing has no recoil. It has really good damage, really good mobility. If I had to guess, they're probably going to nerf the mobility on it, maybe add some more recoil to it. It might stay in competitive. It might jump down to viable. It's going to bounce back and forth in between here. Again, I'd hope that they don't nerf it too severely so that it doesn't, play into the next meta whatsoever. Then the Bullfrog, like I said, we just don't know what they're going to do. They could buff it. They could nerf it. They haven't really been super specific on that. So we're going to leave it as is. Now, on top of that, they also said they're going to adjust the ADS speed on a lot of the Cold War attachments. And in turn, that's going to make a lot of these Cold War weapons that we're sort of already using as secondaries in a lot of cases, like we do with the FARA, with the FFAR, with the Krig even sometimes, depending on what you're using. A lot of these weapons that probably shouldn't be considered secondaries are, you could talk the XM4, a lot of the rifles basically, have really good mobility, and I think JGod recently has compared the mobility on a lot of these Cold War weapons versus the Modern Warfare weapons, and it's night and day. Like, it's no contest, really, I could say, between Cold War and Modern Warfare rifles. You don't really have a reason to use the Modern Warfare ones right now, and I think that's what they're going to try and combat here, which in turn makes a lot of these Modern Warfare weapons a lot more competitive and a lot more usable. So if that's the case, you suddenly have things like the Groza, like the XM4, like the Krig, like the FFAR, and even the FARA that we've been using paired with other rifles like the Amax, for instance, or other snipers, LW3, CAR, whatever it may be. And those are our go-to secondaries because they have really good mobility and you can use them up close. The SMG category, though, hasn't been seeing a ton of love lately, even though we do have things like the Mac 10, which is really good, the Bullfrog, which is really good, but they're going to adjust it in some way. The MP5 from both games is also up there. So you have some of these SMGs that are sort of underutilized. You also have quite a few other SMGs that are also very underutilized, like, for instance, the MP7. The LC10 is definitely in the competitive category now. I was sort of on the fence with that one after the nerf happened, but it's definitely up there now. The AK-74U doesn't get a ton of love. Other rifles, the M13, the Kilo, the Grau, the AN, the FAL definitely, because this is actually ridiculously good. It's just a semi-auto, so people tend to sort of avoid it, you could say. Those are all weapons that are going to become a lot more competitive when they end up nerfing some of these Cold War weapons. I don't envision them touching these guns at all because they don't really have a reason to, and they didn't specify that they would. But when you knock down something like the FARA or the FFAR again, suddenly you have weapons like the RAM and the M4 and the Grau and the Kilo that really jump up in terms of usability, if that's a word, because they've been good for quite some time. They just haven't been the best. They haven't been the meta choice, meta meaning most effective tactic available. When you can use, say, the FARA, which has good mobility and good range and good recoil, over something like the Grau, which has decent mobility, decent range, decent recoil, you're going to choose the option that's slightly better every time, right? Unless you're just trying to spice things up, which in that sense would be off meta. So it's sort of hard to now differentiate competitive and viable because we're going to have such a huge mix of weapons. They're going to fall under kind of both depending on the situation. Let's say the FARA, let's say the Krig, and all these other Cold War weapons, Cold War rifles that are in here suffer from this mobility decrease, and like this FARA in specific here gets that nerf. Suddenly you have the Grau, which definitely comes into the competitive scene. Suddenly you have the Kilo, which I would also argue could be up there despite it not being the most powerful gun in the world anymore. It's very easy to use. It's got good control. It's got good range. It's pretty well balanced, you could say. And because of that ease of use factor, some players are going to resort to using it. That's why the Kilo and the Grau are still two of the most popular weapons in the game. It's because they're easy to use. A lot of casual players or even players that are decently good will still resort to these from time to time because they're simple weapons. They have easy control. They're reliable. You don't have to sort of experiment as much as you would with like the AK-47 from Cold War, which has a lot of different routes you could take. The FARA, which has some awkward iron sights in the opinion of some players. The FFAR, which is a bit harder to control over range. So you have like the old reliables, you could say. Grau and Kilo, I definitely think are going to get more attention after this next update. The RAM we already have in the competitive category. I think this is one that a lot more players are going to start to use, especially as a sniper support. It's actually pretty good in that respect. I also think that we're going to have sort of a secondary meta change as well when it comes to you're using a rifle with this or a sniper with this or an LMG with this, for instance. There's a lot of different opportunities for primaries, of course, but if we see this big nerf to using a double AR meta, double AR loadout, I think the shotguns are also going to jump up in popularity as well. Specifically, things like the Gallo and the Street Sweeper, which I actually have below average. That would definitely be inviable as of late. But Gallo and the Street Sweeper could also be on the fence between viable and competitive. Like I said, at this point, we're pretty much just looking at what weapons are going to be usable. Competitive and viable are sort of, broad terms to classify them under right now. But anything that's in these lists here, you could get away with using, it seems, in this next meta once we see that Amax nerf, that FARA adjustment, that Bullfrog adjustment, and the ADS speed adjustment. At the same time, I think the QBZ will probably jump up into that sort of viable area just because it could actually fit the niche of being that secondary rifle you want to use. If we can no longer use things like the XM4 or the FARA as a secondary alongside an Amax or an M4, whatever other weapon you want to use as that sort of close to medium range option, the QBZ could actually fill that spot because it has really good mobility, and if you're comparing its damage versus an SMG, it's a rifle, so it's going to win in some areas there. So the QBZ may actually increase in popularity too. To me, though, it is pretty crazy that we went from having a top meta category that had the M16, the AUG, the Amax, the MAC-10, so many other weapons, the DMR. Like, not that long ago, it was only a couple weeks ago when that was the meta, when everyone is using like the same 4 or 5 weapons, and now we have a ton of different options here. The CAR, still the best sniping option unless they end up nerfing it, which I'm not sure if they would. The Diamatti, a great pistol option. The Psychov, unfortunately, isn't on this list because it's a bit outdated in terms of the newer DLC weapons. Same reason why the PPSH or the Swiss is not on here. But Diamatti and Psychov, great pistols, totally usable. The best long-range sniper in the game because of its great velocity and great range when you have the RAP suppressor and the combat recon on there together. MAC-10, one of the fastest weapons in the game. You can build this out to be extremely speedy and very quick. And its damage up close is also pretty good for a sub. It's very competitive. The SPR, just like sort of an alternative to the CAR, very usable. The DMR, while it did get nerfed, is still very powerful. You could use it. It just has one of those higher skill gaps now. The Stoner, old reliable, very powerful, slow, but powerful. So you got to sort of play to that. The PKM has been a meta weapon for quite some time, sort of an underrated meta weapon, I would say. It can definitely compete, but people tend to avoid LMGs, unless it's the case of the Bruin where you can have some decent mobility, but that is still very good. The Bullfrog, like I said, it could go either way, so we're going to leave it for now. That's sort of a guessing game. Modern Warfare MP5, probably the most reliable SMG, I would say. The Ram 7, like I said, going to be a great sniper option. M4, old reliable, very consistent. The AUG, I'm going to drop down to viable just because its fire rate, everything about it right now is really not that ideal, but you might be able to get away with using it here and there. I wouldn't recommend it, though. It could almost be on the verge of being below average, honestly. Cold War AK-47, very good as a secondary right now. Pretty solid as a primary, takes some getting used to, but still a viable choice. FARA 83, same deal. We're going to have to see how hard they nerf it, but I think it'll still probably be in the mix there. Cold War MP5, insane TTK up close, pretty good mobility, fantastic SMG. FFAR, we're going to have to see with the mobility nerfs, but I do think this will still probably be a decent sniper support weapon. Krig, very reliable, decent range, minimal recoil, pretty good mobility. M16, despite the nerf, is still solid for medium and longer range fights. LC10, very consistent SMG right now. Surprisingly good range as well, so great choice. Amax sort of depends on how hard they nerf it. Grau, great velocity, great control, great range. You can't go wrong with that. Same deal with the Kilo. And then potentially the Gallo, the Street Sweeper, that sort of shotgun meta could come back into play too if the secondary meta actually sees some pretty drastic changes. And when you look at viable, despite this being a different category, I think a lot of these options are actually pretty solid. The Pellington, personally, I'm not a fan of, but it's definitely usable. Same deal with the HDR and the AX50. Again, just old reliable in this case. RPD, awkward to build out, but it does have some decent power. EBR is sort of, I mean, I would probably take something like the DMR or even the FAL over that, if I'm being honest with you. Same deal with the SKS. Type 63, probably in the same deal as like the AUG at this point. It could be on the verge of below average, but if you really wanted to use it, you could find some success with it if you're a higher skill player. Holger, kind of underrated, actually pretty good as an LMG. Same deal with the SA-87. The SA-87, despite being, awkward when it comes to visual recoil and not so great with mobility, it hits like a truck. This is a really strong LMG, and I could see more people starting to use this here and there after this next meta update. Finn, really good for control, absolute laser beam. Damage is sort of but depending on your playstyle, you could find a fit for it. M91, great power, kind of slow. Going back to that shotgun meta, the Origin has always been a decent option, as has the R90, but there have just been better choices. Again, going back to the most effective tactics available sort of conversation there. Same deal with the JAK 12. So all these shotguns are certainly usable and will be, especially after this next update, but I think the Gallo and the Street Sweeper are probably the most reliable option there. AK-74U, great velocity, could see some more action after the secondary adjustments. Fennec has that insane TTK up close, but you got to be like within a couple of feet of them, right? It doesn't have much velocity past a very short range, so it's almost niche in that sense, I would say, right? You got to use it extremely close, but up there it is very good. It will delete people. MP7, great SMG. Man, I love the MP7. It's such a good weapon in general, though. AUG, same deal, surprisingly powerful for an SMG, and with the 5.56 conversion, it's certainly an option too if you wanted to go a different route. P90, again, sort of an underrated SMG. Usable, not the best, but definitely viable. XM4, really good right now. You could almost argue this is competitive as a secondary rifle. That's going to change, though, once this update happens, but I think it'll still probably fit in this area of competitive, viable, usable if you really wanted to. Groza, same deal despite the nerf. Modern Warfare AK-47, if you can look past the recoil, will be pretty good. Odin, Powerhouse just has a smaller mag and some recoil. M13, great for range, very, very easy to use. A94 has those unique features with a hyper burst and some decent damage over range. FAL is honestly extremely underrated. The TTK on this thing at every single range, close, medium, long, is actually insanely good. It's very, very competitive, but people just don't like using a semi-auto weapon for a lot of those gunfights just because it's harder to hit your shots. The AUG, like I said earlier, is sort of, not that great anymore. Then the QBZ has that potential to sort of fill that secondary AR slot. So obviously, you got so many options. Like I said, I think after we get past this next weapon update, this next weapon tuning pass, the meta will be at the best point it's ever been. The meta will be the most diverse and the most open that it's ever been. So yeah, there you have it. That is how I see the next meta update affecting the total meta here and how it's going to change things moving forward. And that's going to wrap things up for today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. There is definitely a plane outside. Hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. If you did, let me know by dropping a like on it. And of course, if you're new here or if you haven't already subscribed, this is the place to be for everything going on in COD. News, intel, updates, setups, you name it, it's all right here. So feel free to subscribe. That way you can always stay up to date. Once again, and as always, thanks so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you guys later. Peace out.